Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Danny Holloway. Danny is a second-year student in our ExecMBA class of 2025, and he's also a Batten Scholar. I recently connected with Danny to talk more about his background, his decision to pursue an MBA, the impact of his time at Darden, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this episode is helpful to you, please like this episode and subscribe to the ExecMBA podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my interview with Danny Holloway. Danny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brett. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. How's everything going? How are you doing?
Doing really well. It's an interesting time, moving into the first set of electives with the program and having recently started a new job. It's a lot of big changes, but both exciting on those fronts.
That is a lot. Tell us about your new job.
Sure. I joined a company called Virtru. They specialize in data protection, which is an area that I've been focused on, particularly to enable analytics and advanced use cases related to national security and defense. Just have been aware of the company for a long time, and they had an amazing opening for a role that I felt like was a good fit. And just under 2 months under the belt, hit the ground running. And like all startups, it's been really, really exciting.
Well, congratulations on the new job. I know being in a new role, also navigating the program, that can be a lot. But you're in the second year of the program, which is a time, obviously you're picking your classes, you're taking electives, but it's also a time when I start to hear from students that they feel like they're kind of in a groove. They really own their schedule a little bit more because they're picking their classes, and they've been doing the program now for over a year. So maybe it feels a little bit more second nature.
It does. Yeah, I think that it's a little bit of, time management skills that you build up through practice, and a little bit of just getting used to a new level of busy. Happens at all the major milestones. I remember going from having 0 kids to having 1 kid to 2 kids to 3 kids, and each time I thought I couldn't possibly get busier, but somehow you kind of adjust and you settle in, and all things you get used to at some point, and you just figure out how to make it work for you.
So Darden has just been one of those adjustments, adding school to already a full plate. You figure out how to make it work.
You make it work, and there's the things that you look forward to that make it easy. Getting back to OGRs, we've got one coming up. Getting to see your learning team and the rest of the cohort in person. Those intermittent things that you just really enjoy help make it all worth it.
Well, one of the things that I've been struck by, Danny, as I've talked with students in your classes, students are increasingly thinking about the program as kind of in 2 phases. You have the first 12 months, 6 quarters of the program where you're doing core curriculum, and then you have this elective period. And so the first year is really, cohort based. Everybody's taking the same classes, really on the same schedule. And then you get to the electives, and depending upon where you are with your credits, what classes you're taking, students can have different schedules during a given quarter. And so you might not necessarily see all of your classmates on a given weekend residency. Is that how you would describe it? Is that how you would think about it?
Yeah, I think so. I've had one of those weekends so far, and it was in some ways exciting to find out that my Saturday, what would have been a full day, it was only a half day, and so I could have, whether you choose to procrastinate and put some of your prep off to morning of, or just have a free Saturday morning that you would have otherwise spent inside of the grounds there. It's been nice to kind of have that. One of the classes I'm doing is asynchronous. And so I think in that case, I'm getting more flexibility and autonomy around making it fit in my schedule, instead of having to just be there on time at the 7 p.m. kickoff or whatever it might be that you get with the synchronous sessions.
And for folks who may be less familiar with synchronous versus asynchronous, so synchronous is a live class. Asynchronous elective, what does that look like, Dan? No, it's maybe early days, but
it's a fair amount of video content that's put together by the professor in clips. So you typically end up watching 30 minutes to 60 minutes of recorded kind of lecture. And then the majority of the interaction happens through the discussion board on Canvas. So you've got to post by Friday your thoughts, and then between Friday and Sunday, you look at the rest of the content that's been produced by your classmates, and then you're interacting through replies on the discussion board like a forum.
What is the class in particular?
Uh, that one is AI, artificial intelligence in marketing.
Oh, that sounds like a really cool class. Something I imagine you were interested in.
Yes, being in the technology space and working with AI, particularly now in this current hype cycle with the agentic AI and the progress that's being made with the GPTs and the LLMs, it definitely is timely in the sense that we're talking about something that's playing out in my day-to-day life in the classroom instead of looking back at like a historic case that may have happened, years prior. And so it's really interesting to hear people talk about how it's impacting them in their careers and lives, and talk to people who I wouldn't otherwise be interacting with, completely different career fields.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about the program, kind of where you are in this elective
Sure.
period. But let's start by just getting to know you a little bit more. Tell us about your background.
Absolutely happy to. See, I went to JMU undergrad, studied computer science, so deeply technical background. Um, Started out in kind of a technology consulting role, and then moved farther down into day-to-day individual contributor developing software. My entire professional path has had me working for federal customers. So in working and living in Northern Virginia, that is definitely that kind of the big elephant in the geography. And so I've worked in all sorts of different projects, ranging from research programs on traumatic brain injuries that was co-sponsored by the NFL, the Army, and the National Institute of Health. I've worked on applications for disaster recovery, national security stuff, and I kind of had myself going down a path where I was in more technical leadership, and I felt like I had this missing piece of sort of finance and business acumen to really make the crossing of that chasm and go from somebody who has a deeply technical background, but somebody who can be full rounded and contribute meaningfully in the executive leadership meetings that I was finding myself in, but just wish I had more business background to draw from. And so right as I was turning 40, I was looking at it and saying, I think it's kind of now or never. I think I want to go and round that out and do an MBA program. And just given where I was with everything going on between kids and work um, and trying to be a good at all of those things, I knew travel was probably something that I couldn't really fit into the schedule beyond what I already had, and that was what really drew me to the Darden program and the Sands Family Grounds in Roslyn.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think for a lot of our prospective students, they're thinking about schedule, time, convenience. The commute is also, of course, part of the equation. What has it been like to add an executive MBA program to your existing schedule? Obviously, we talked a little bit about you've gone through these phases of life where you've added more and more things, additions to your family, obviously work, etc., and you kind of adapted to that. But what has it been like to be an executive MBA student on top of everything else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there have been times where I've felt overwhelmed. There haven't been too many of those times. There's sometimes you get that perfect storm of a essential business meeting that you can't miss out on that happens to overlap with the Friday afternoon OGR, and you're going into exams. And I guess in this coming end of the quarter, I've got my first international trip for the global residency. And so I'm thinking, how do I find myself prepared so that I can wrap up the quarter, finish my exams, get on a flight, and be out of work and life for a week, and really get to be present for the trip to Argentina. And so, in a lot of ways, you kind of find yourself just having to be more disciplined and more deliberate in what you say yes to, and if anything I've learned, it's just making sure that I'm taking the time to build out my calendar and have that reflected on the calendar that my wife and I use to coordinate the family activities, and that I've got it on my work thing too, so that I don't end up double booking or over committing. For me, it's forced a new level of discipline on managing the schedule.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about shared calendars, families, making sure that everybody's on the same page, and probably managing commitments on a quarterly basis. And at Darden, that doesn't mean every 4 months. It actually means every 2 months, because each quarter is 2 months in duration. Do y'all sit down every couple of months, kind of figure out what's going on, or is it maybe even more shorter periods of time than that?
It's kind of day by day, if not week by week. The thing, we got into a rhythm there, before in the core, where you just knew, 3 weeks out of the month you were going to be doing your Tuesday night class, your Thursday night class, and then that fourth week you'd have your Friday, Saturday, Sunday classes. And then you throw the new electives into the mix, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I've got to delete all those recurring events and go class by class and make sure that I've got the new schedule reflected on the calendar. And so typically it's calling out the exceptions, the, hey, by the way, remember, I'm going to be in class on Friday afternoon and I won't be able to make it to the softball game Saturday morning. So I think we've both kind of settled into that routine. And it's just being able to recognize where the collisions would occur if we don't hash it out ahead of time.
What has it been like for your kids to see you in this program? What do they think?
That's a good question. I think you were gracious enough to host them before I had come into the program, and they got to see the beautiful grounds. And I think that really helped them understand what I was doing and for the significance of it. It wasn't just me, choosing to go out with friends. It was me taking on, a pretty demanding, but also, you know, I guess enhancing initiative. And so I think that was really helpful for them. For the most part, they're pretty supportive. Every now and then they'll be like, "What do you mean you can't come to my game? You've got class." So they're learning some adult life lessons as 10, 8, 6 year olds. But I think we've started talking about graduation. I know that sounds crazy, but it's coming up in less than a year, and they're really excited to go see UVA and Charlottesville. So I just keep talking to them about May.
That's a lot to look forward to, and obviously very much a group accomplishment. When a student graduates, all the people who supported them along the way is very much a collective achievement. At least that's been my impression, having been around for a few of those graduation ceremonies.
Yeah, that's a great way of characterizing it. I draw back to a couple of times at promotion ceremonies for my dad, who was a career Navy officer. And, a lot of times they started by thanking the family members, which you don't hear too often. But, after you've been dragged to your fourth elementary school, you realize that it is a family commitment, and it is sort of a family affair, whether the kids have agreed to it or not. So I always try to remain cognizant of that, think about it. Um, but yeah, I know that they're looking forward to it being over as much as they are, sort of proud and supportive of what I'm doing.
Well, Danny, I'm curious about what the time commitment has looked like. We get this question from prospective students all the time. How many hours per week? And obviously, it ebbs and flows. And your life is not a static thing. Work is not a static thing. And to your earlier point, sometimes work will have to take more time and attention, or family commitments. But in terms of your week to week, what does that look like in terms of schoolwork?
Sure. It definitely varies. I know, especially in core, I had a lot of catching up to do in some ways. Back to the fact that I graduated from undergrad in 2005, and I hadn't studied in a long time. I've been working, but the idea of sitting down and studying and taking tests, I had to refamiliarize myself with that. And I was also taking classes that really challenged me, particularly when it came to like macroeconomics and things that I just hadn't really paid any attention to or had much exposure to. There were other classes that I took, and I think interestingly enough, they were some of the ones that got the most groans, like decision analysis, that kind of came naturally. And so, there were classes I had to really put the work in and do all the readings and, meet with my learning team, and they would take, it could be anywhere of like 2 to 4 hours of prep for a night class, and then ideally have some time to review and digest, and then still do some last minute studying before the finals. And then there were other classes like DA where I could kind of skim through the stuff, and I could take an hour or so and work through the exercises, building out the regressions and models, and really draw on my experience. But I went to pick the MBA route to go into areas that I didn't have a lot of depth in. So there was less of that than there may be for some folks that are coming in with a strong economic or finance background.
Yeah, it's a good point. Everybody has different learning curves. Not all classes are created equal in terms of how the subject matter might hit you or come to you, as the case might be. I do think for many of our students, an executive MBA program, we have lots of people who don't necessarily have that traditional business academic background. And so some things like finance, accounting, sort of core business school subjects that you might think of may take a little bit more time to
Mhm.
navigate, to get used to. And you kind of have to accept that. I think it's important to acknowledge that that is going to be part of your journey. What do you think about that, Danny?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true, and it's also the thing that has been most broadening for me. Not necessarily just the different subject matters, but getting to talk to people outside of my industry, outside of my geography. Hear the lessons and the ways that they can relate to the case material, from the things that are going on in their day to day or the things they've experienced, has really been the most interesting and eye opening. Some of the stuff that honestly I just never even would have thought of. In particular, the entrepreneurship through acquisition stuff that we've been going through right now. Um, I knew that there were small businesses out there, but I never really thought about the life cycle, and I never really thought about somebody coming out of an MBA program, conducting a funded search and taking over as CEO. So there was a lot of things that I just didn't know about, that were totally new to me and very interesting, that I might not have ever considered. So I think taking account and standing of where you are and what areas you have depth and that you can meaningfully contribute and sort of help guide the class will be just as rewarding as those areas where you just sit there kind of in listen mode and you get exposed to something that you didn't have any background in. They're both different, both rewarding.
I think it's important to remember that you are here to learn and to fill in those gaps. Sometimes I'll see folks early on in the program and might be taking some of these classes that feel like they're more challenging or stretching them a bit. And they may think like, say something like, I really don't know anything about this. Other people seem to know a lot about it, but I don't feel like I know anything. And that might be a little bit challenging, I think, in the moment, because Danny, when I think about it, people don't have that kind of experience in their day to day at work. Most people at work, they know exactly what they're doing, or they're well on their way to knowing what they're working on based on their prior experience. And it's rare for you to encounter something where you might have a really, really steep learning curve. What do you think about that? What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think the reality is that I struggled with that a bit because you look around the classroom and I think everybody is there, one because they have a decent amount of ambition, and they're probably high performers in their area, and so you get thrown into a room with a bunch of very capable people who have expertise in an area that you're a complete, amateur or novice in, and it can be daunting at first, but then you get your moment where you can tap into your experience and you can be the expert. And people who you look at with wide-eyed amazement, in finance or whatever it might be, are looking at you and saying, "How did you know that? What is? Can you tell me more about what you mentioned in class?" And it is that true mixed bag of expertise that really I think is. I've never encountered anything like that at work. Darden may be the first time that I've gotten to that level of talent and diversity um, on a regular basis, and it's been really really interesting. You just learn so much. But yeah, I can't say that there's anything else like it. It was a bit of a shock, and I had to kind of get used to it and give myself, I guess, a little grace and say, yeah, these are people who do this for a living. Yeah, there's a reason why they know this so well, and that just means that I've got a lot to learn.
I want to stick with this because I think one of the reasons why you are picking up on the expertise of your classmates or hearing about their experiences is because of the case method. And was that something that was attractive to you when you thought about Darden? How did you think about the case method as a prospective student?
Yeah, it was. I got to do a class visit and experience it, and I didn't forget it. It was absolutely impactful. I thought, walking out, this is going to be a lot of fun. It was also the first time I realized I'm going to have to take this a lot more seriously than I have all of the other academic endeavors to date. The case method requires that the preparation be done ahead of time. You can't just show up to class and listen and take notes and be okay. If you really want to get the most out of it, you have to have read the case, thought about it, taken some notes. There's usually some guiding questions, but you don't know what path it's going to take because it is truly interactive. And I imagine that even the professors at some point are looking at it and saying, "Oh, I didn't know we were going to go down this path today. I may have taught this lesson 10 times, and this is the first time somebody brought that issue up." Um, so, to be able to engage and get the most out of it, I think you really have to, do your homework. And I guess that gets back to the time commitment. Um, but it also has cemented the, the ability to retain and apply that you get from doing that case method. To me, is probably unmatched. I will probably avoid doing more asynchronous classes, even though it's nice to kind of get some flexibility in the schedule. I prefer the synchronous sessions, and in me in particular, it could just be Zoom fatigue, but like the OGR, where you're off of Zoom, you're in the room. To me, that is energizing, and I like it.
Yeah, you'll typically have in an average month, you imagine a month having 4 weeks, and it's an average month that we're talking about here. In this program, you're going to have one weekend residency typically in that month, and online class a couple of nights per week. Most weeks, you will not have online class the week leading up to the weekend residency. So if you do the math, you would have about 6 synchronous sessions in a weekend residency. So you're going to be busy in the program, and managing your energy and all of that. It's a big part of being an executive MBA student and finding ways to kind of refresh and kind of renew things for you. I do think the on grounds residencies function that way, Danny. For a lot of students, the energy that you feel on that Friday when people start to roll in, it's clear people are really excited to be back and to be together.
Yeah, I completely agree. The other thing not to be missed is there is that social aspect too, and so sometimes Saturday morning or Sunday morning things can be a little bit rough because you were out late with friends. But you know, uh, you're absolutely right. You kind of build on the collective energy of the group, and you get ready for classes. And yeah, Friday afternoons are definitely fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm only 2 days away.
That's right. And I'll just share this during the elective period in case you're curious. So during the core, weekend residencies, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, starts Friday around 11 a.m. That's when lunch begins. The class officially kind of kicks off around noon, but many students will get here by 11. And then there's a time for announcements from 11:30 to noon, what we call homeroom. And then on Friday, class will go to about 6 p.m. You'll have 4 class sessions over the course of that Friday. Saturday goes from about 8:20 or so at about 5:30 p.m. So you have 5 class sessions over the course of that day. And then Sunday is about 8:20 or so to 3 p.m. Roughly. And so you have 4 class sessions. So 13 class sessions over the course of the weekend. And the class sessions will be across the typically 3 courses that you're taking in that quarter. In the executive MBA program, students are typically taking 3 courses in a given quarter. And so you have some combination of those courses over the weekend. Now, when you get to the elective period where Danny is, there's some electives that meet on Friday. There's some electives that meet on Saturday and Sunday morning, and there's some electives that meet on Saturday and Sunday afternoon. And so, to Danny's point, way back when we started the conversation, get a little bit more choice on your schedule here. And so you might have a Friday elective, and you may just have a Saturday and Sunday elective because you may be doing an independent study or an asynchronous elective like Danny's doing. And so your schedule can look a little bit different. So Danny, let's talk about the electives that you're taking. How did you pick the electives that you're taking?
Sure. Yeah. So the bidding process is pretty interesting. You've got this sort of allocated amount of credits you can spend towards the classes that you want to take. You get some historic data around class size and the capacity, and so you could either peanut butter spread it out and say, this is my ideal schedule. I want these classes. I'm going to go ahead and put even bids in. Or you could look and say, look, there's a small class taught by the professor I love, and it's a topic I'm absolutely dying to be in. And I'm going to put a significant allocation of my credits to make sure I get that class. I did a little bit of a blend. And there were certainly some times where there were either 2 classes that I wanted to take that only happened at the same time, and I had to pick. And there were other times where I looked and was like, well, I don't know that I would have necessarily stack ranked either of the 2 classes that I'm looking at for a time I want, but I want that time. And now that I think about it, that's a class that I probably should take, even though it didn't, immediately appeal to me. And so it's a bit of trade-off analysis, and you've got to just decide, where you want to make those big bets and make sure you get the class you want. And then, keep an eye on the wait list and see what happens, because they do open up slots based on certain allocations that they, I guess, reserve for the part-time and the other MBA programs. And so after everything shakes out, there's this period of sort of drop adjust where you can fine tune the schedule. It'd be interesting to go through it again now that I've done it. But at the end of the day, I think I pretty much got the classes I wanted, and then made 1 or 2 swaps based on availability to round out the schedule and make sure I had all the credits I needed.
So you mentioned the marketing and AI and marketing class that you're taking, the asynchronous elective. Tell us some of the other electives. It's always fun. Obviously, we've got electives listed out on our website, which folks can check out. But tell us some of the electives that you'll be taking.
Yeah, right now I'm taking entrepreneurship through acquisition, which was one of those that I didn't really think about, but it was in the time slot that I had open, and I'm glad I took it. I'm taking digital product management, which is the first class where I felt like I really know what I'm doing here. Not that I haven't taken anything away from it, because there's absolutely been things that I can bring into work and apply immediately. But it's probably the first time where I've been like, oh, I can share something here, and I think it'll really help pull the class along, and relate the material that we're going through towards day-to-day interaction with colleagues. Yeah, I think it was nice to have the choice and the ability to kind of map out a path that's a little more individualized. I should have done some prep and pulled it up, but I'm excited about a bunch of the classes that I ended up getting. And so far in this quarter, the one that I wasn't gunning for has been the one that's been kind of the most eye-opening. So probably hard to go wrong. But I can say that in talking to some of my classmates who are in more of the quant heavy negotiation valuation class right now, I'm feeling very relieved that that's not me, because I would definitely have to put the work in. And between the new job and the trip coming up. I'm glad that this quarter I can tap into some of my expertise.
I will say, I feel like entrepreneurship through acquisition, ETA, is growing in interest amongst executive MBA students. I've talked to a number of people who are really intrigued by it, actually thinking about doing it after they graduate from the program. Is that the vibe you're getting in that class? Because I feel like it's started to come up more and more in conversations that I've had with people during on grounds residencies or OGR, as we talked about here.
Yeah, I mean, I can say it was not on my radar coming in at all. Through the experiential learning track that we had in the January term and that we have coming up, that was one of the elective tracks you could choose. And I know that our group sort of self-organized an ETA group that I've gone to a handful of sessions that they hold, and they do kind of weekly, almost like a deal review, where somebody will come to the group with a thing that they're considering, and kind of present it as a, not the full, sim or sip or anything detailed, but conceptually, and they'll ask, does anyone have expertise? With it could be anything from agriculture or one of my learning team members, Rami, and I were just talking about two prospective businesses he was looking at in the identity management space. And so, he was kind of asking me about a potential combination and efficiency story there. And so drawing on my day-to-day work, but his, ETA search and bringing those two together to help with the assessment and diligence, really, really kind of opened my eyes to the possibility. And then class has kind of walked us through what some of the other business schools are doing, some of the success and failure story, well, not failure stories, but, some of the ETA searches that didn't materialize in an acquisition. So for me, it's all been new, very interesting. I wouldn't have even thought to consider it. I didn't know it was a possibility.
Well, Danny, a few more questions here.
Sure.
How do you feel like your career goals have evolved or your career interests have evolved during the time of the program? Obviously, you had a recent job change here, but do you feel like you kind of came in thinking one thing, you're thinking something different now, or has it stayed pretty steady?
Good question. Um, I'd say it's been relatively steady in the long-term big picture, in the sense that I've always had this itch, this kind of dream, I guess, of starting my own company. Um, there's the part of me that wishes I had done it sooner when I knew less, because then I didn't have all of the reasons to talk myself out of it, uh, and more time. Um, but if anything, I think now with some of the skills I've developed, um, and some of the other businesses I've had a chance to dive into and be exposed to, it's also built up in my confidence and um, the skill set I get to draw from, if I do go down that path. So it's still a big if, um, but it's just as much as an if as it was on the way in. Except now I just feel like I'm a little better prepared.
Yeah, I certainly heard that from students. It's something about going through the program. Obviously, the core curriculum is so broad, you get exposed to so many different things, and you go through this experience of being asked a lot of questions and having to think on your feet and answer questions that you might not necessarily have had direct experience with. And there's something about that that feels very empowering. And it's interesting to think how that intersects with entrepreneurship. I've talked with a number of people here on the podcast and just the program generally who feel like they never would have thought about entrepreneurship before the program. Maybe something on sort of the back of their mind, but just didn't feel like they were the person who could do that. And through the course of the program, the experience that they've had, all of a sudden it feels very real and like something they could actually take on.
Yeah, not to make light of it or anything, but in some ways it's kind of like exposure therapy. You get put in front of a room of a hundred of your peers, and you get to walk through a balance sheet or financial statement. It's something you've never done before, and you get it right, and you kind of realize, oh yeah, I had to put the work in, but absolutely capable of doing these things. You also get to realize that you may just have enough knowledge and awareness, and that it's still in a lot of cases collective effort and a team sport, and you just have more breadth to bring to the table. And there still may be, a CFO or a finance partner or whoever it is. You'll just be a little less reliant on those folks in your organization that are sort of domain specific, and drilling down into their expertise to help the business run.
But one of the other things I want to ask you about is you're a Batten Scholar here at the Darden School. This is a selective scholarship. It's probably the most competitive scholarship that we have available to executive MBA students. It requires a supplemental essay. You have to go through an interview if you're nominated to interview with the committee. Then the committee has to decide, yes, we want to award you the scholarship. So what's it like being a Batten Scholar? What kind of resources and community network support do you have available to you?
Yeah, great question. Working with Anna Fife and the Batten Group has been really rewarding and really interesting. Talking to Carlos and folks about where Darden is related to technical capability, both in terms of curriculum and the graduates. So in some ways, gotten to kind of be a strategic element and help shape the future of Darden, and in some ways, at least the Batten components of it. In other ways, it's the ability to kind of have those meetings with a small group of your fellow Batten Institute scholars. And there's this part that I feel somewhat guilty about, where I feel like I I should probably be taking more advantage of the resources available to me than I am. It's just been one of those things. I was like, oh, next quarter is going to be easier, or once I've got 3 months under my belt, I'll be settled into this job. In some ways, I probably should and could be doing a lot more than I am. But that said, it's still been immensely rewarding and eye-opening to be tied into the Batten organization.
Yeah, it's been great talking with Anna here on the podcast. We had Carlos on, also had Chantal and Stu from your class,
Hmm.
other Batten scholars. I do think, the relationships are as big a piece of it as anything, right? Just being able to get to know these folks, leverage their knowledge and expertise, the connections that they would help you make with other folks in the Darden network and community. It seems like the relationships are a big part.
Yeah, absolutely. Chantal is in my learning team too, and so we get a lot of opportunities to cross paths through both schoolwork and then mutual interests and being in the area together. Um, it will constantly be sending each other links about things that are going on at Amazon or things that are going on in the national security space, and how those two worlds come together. And Stu, living up in Baltimore and being in sort of venture and investment portfolio management and in medicine, has been another interesting view and a world that I just didn't have exposure to. So absolutely, again, that convergence of people that are experts in their field but are doing something vastly different from what you do, it just brings a different perspective, and a different way of looking at opportunities, and some of the most interesting conversations have been with people who aren't in the same space that I'm in, and I've really enjoyed that.
Well, Danny, last question for you here. What's a piece of advice you would share with our prospective student listeners? Something that you would encourage them to think about as they consider their own MBA journeys?
Sure. We just left notes to the incoming class. And this is something I remember getting, a little red envelope with a handwritten note when I was at my first on grounds in Roslyn and feeling particularly overwhelmed. And so I channeled that moment, and I wrote a pretty simple "Don't forget to have fun" in the note. And so it would be that. It would be, you know, you're here to learn, you're here to meet people, build a network. Um, you may have been, very academically competitive or professionally competitive. Um, but I would say, for me, I would want to remind people, to really get the most out of the program, you've got to put energy and effort into it and be present. And as much of that happens in the classroom as it does outside of the classroom. And so, don't forget to have fun. Do your prep, have some capacity to go out and have a good time and talk to people about, it could be what was discussed in class, or it could be about what's going on in their lives. But yeah, my takeaway would be don't forget to have some fun.
One of these town halls that we host for incoming admitted students a couple of years ago, I think, may have actually been for your class, Danny. Michael Ho, who is a member of the finance faculty at Darden, um,
Hmm.
he shared this really interesting piece of advice for students. And it was along the lines of, when people think about executive MBA programs or working while pursuing a degree, they're oftentimes focused on the inconvenience or the ways that it's going to make life harder for them or taxing. They're going to be tired, less time to do other things. It's all this kind of negative associations. But one of the things that he really stressed is you get a chance to be in school again. You get a chance to do something for yourself, to learn, to be
Hmm.
around a really interesting group of people who you wouldn't have otherwise met but for this program. They all do things different than you. And ideally, in this equation, school is actually a reprieve from everything else that you have going on. It's something that's exciting, that's uplifting, that's energizing. Um, and I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it, because when I talk with prospective students, they are asking a lot of questions about time commitment and what else all this is going to look like in their day-to-day life. But it's also really nice to be in school, and to learn and to be around 120 or so people who are they've all made that same choice.
It really is. I talked about it in the beginning, but for me, there was definitely I had to like relearn how to flex that muscle, how to be in an academic situation, how to balance competing schedules. You do it day to day at work, but that's within your company, um, and you get into a rhythm. For me in particular, having been out of school for nearly 20 years, getting to be back in school is fun. It can be overwhelming and daunting at times, but I have really enjoyed, the intellectual stimulation, the interaction, the social elements of it. Um, yeah, I definitely recommend it. And if anything, I'd say sooner might be better than later. There's times where I'm thinking, oh, this would have been really good to do when I was 30, but I'm still enjoying it.
Well, Danny, thanks for your time today. It's great talking with you as always, and look forward to seeing you in just a couple days for the next on grounds residency.
Absolutely, Brett. Thanks for having me, and I'll see you on Friday.
And that was my interview with Danny Holloway, second year student in our Executive MBA class of 2025. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXEC, MBA@darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.